and welcome to PodRocket, a web development podcast brought to you by LogRocket. LogRocket provides AI-first session replay and analytics, which surface the UX and technical issues impacting user experiences. Start understanding where your users are struggling by trying it for free at logrocket.com. Hi, I'm Jack Herrington, and today we have my good friend, Tanner Linsley, creator of TanStack, here to talk about TanStack, TanStack Start, and all things TanStack. Hey, Tanner, how you doing?
I'm doing great. It's good to be with you yet again.
Yeah, we've only met a couple of times.
Just a few.
So I think probably for most folks, their first entry point into the TanStack verse would be React Query. So, if you obviously React has had async issues about use effect and all that for years. And the kind of go-to solution for everybody has been, they'll just bring in React Query and you've got use query and it's fantastic. And that's kind of one of the bedrock projects of TanStack.
Yeah. It's funny because people know TanStack because of React Query, but that wasn't my first library. My first one was actually React Table.
Which is also a huge problem.
First one that I needed. It's also, data grids are a little less ubiquitous as something like a query, like a data sync engine. But if you do need a data grid, somehow TanStack Table has become the most popular data grid, open source popular data grid. It's obviously not the most financially successful data grid. It is free, but it's popular. People love it. That was the first one that I built. And
it kind of set the framework. It's basically headless, it's across platforms, and that creates the vibe that ends up becoming the sort of norm across all of TanStack. Is that it's React Query, but it's actually TanStack Query, and really you can use it on React, you can use it on Svelte, you can use it all over the place.
React Table was actually the one where I feel like I learned the most. Like it was the staging area for all of the things that kind of became the TanStack tenets. Like we had breaking changes. It's the one where people were like, oh man, they switched architectures like 2 or 3 times. Or like we rewrote it in TypeScript and it's, oh my gosh, all this rewriting. And so it kind of got the brunt of the learning in the wild. And then we took everything good that we learned and we just plopped that onto these other ideas. So when I built React Query, I already knew like, okay, headless, type safe, like all this. Well, type safety.
Yeah.
I had to come around to type safety a little bit later.
Oh.
But
okay.
Anyway. Yeah.
Right. And so we've got Table, we've got Virtual, which is something similar.
Yeah, Virtual, it's a pretty small library. It's a lot of fun though. Virtual is for virtualizing DOM elements and their visibility. If you're a web developer, hopefully you know that there is a cap to how many elements you can render on the screen, especially like long lists.
Yeah. You'd be surprised at how many people don't know that, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And usually it catches you off guard. At first, you only have to learn this once. And you're like, oh, crap, I can't render 10,000 items in a list. So TanStack Virtual is all about taking that list and only rendering, only painting to the screen the stuff that's actually going to be visible on your screen. So you could have a list of 1 million items. Well, I don't know what the max. Chrome has some like max integer size for like an array, like a list or something like that, like a DOM node list length. Whatever that length is, like we can render that. And it's just 60 frames per second, buttery smooth.
Nice. It is a UI, after all. You probably shouldn't, even though if you could, you probably shouldn't have 10 million items on the screen or something like that. There is a limit. Yeah.
Well, you'd be surprised. You get some data grids with infinite scroll. Yeah, you can get up to some crazy stuff. It's more common than you think.
And then you took on TanStack Router, React Router with TanStack Router.
Yeah.
Very cool.
History lesson, actually. I built React Form.
Okay.
Before I built all of this, which is weird. I built a form library back in the day. I started marketing it and doing it. And then I realized that I hated forms so much. And the state management story behind it was just terrible. It got so bad and annoying that I just decided to just bury it.
We now have a TanStack form. So that means that another one came in to do the grunt work.
But the original like React form, I still own, I think, the React-form package name.
Really?
And I had a version of it, and I was just like, I don't want to do this. And I buried it for probably like 2 or 3 years until I was like, hey, you know what? Let's do it. Let's try this again, which is when I met Corbin and we did TanStack Form.
Yeah, forms are all fun and games until you start getting into things like the back button and stuff like that. And then it's just like,
Oh my gosh.
nope, don't want to
Even
deal
to
with
this
that.
day, I'm
No.
just happy to have Corbin there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And let's not do TanStack Auth ever. Can we just agree to that on this podcast?
Amen. I never want to do it. I have rolled a little bit of my own Auth here and there. You play with the cookies and you immediately see the surface area that is just like so scary. And just the explosion of permutations that you can get with all the vendors and the different ways of logging in. I mean,
SSO suck too.
Oh, the enterprise features.
Why would I know multi-tenancy?
Oh, God. On some level, it's man, there's companies just for Auth. Come on, that's just dumb. And then you go in and try and build your own, and then you're like, yeah, there's companies for Auth. And it's this really weird tug of war because I feel like if you really only need the basic features, it is something that you can wrangle pretty easily. Like if you're like, I only need a
social login,
and we're going to use
GitHub,
HTTPS only cookies, and we're just going to expire sessions. If you have this really thin use case, it's like you can spin it up and it works great. But the minute you start growing into any of these like SSO or multi-tenancy or even just like, oh, by the way, do you want to do like a reset password flow? People are like, no, I'm out,
Yeah. Like self-service SSO stuff where you want to be a SaaS and then you want companies to go and sign up with your service and do the SSO integration themselves as opposed to you having a person. I remember when I saw, I think it was WorkOS had a whole UI just for that. And I was geeking out on it. I'm like, oh man, this is the best thing ever. Because I know that is a huge amount of work. It sounds so boring. But at the same time, it's if you know what that is, you're instantly in love with that feature.
Yeah. Well, and there's a reason that WorkOS and Clerk are partners with TanStack because we don't want to do that.
Got to tell you, TanStack partners are like a who's who. And just recently, Netlify and Cloudflare got together to support TanStack Start, which is a competitor with Next.js and Remix or what I don't guess React Router v7 / whatever. Yeah. But that's amazing. You got the two of the biggest players in the industry, Cloudflare and Netlify, to agree essentially that they want to support TanStack Start and Astro.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
That was an incredible move by them. Actually, it was cool. I would have hoped that we could have done something like that, but that was their idea, and I was like, "Wow, this is awesome."
Yeah, yeah.
They're like, "Oh yeah, we got together and we decided we're gonna just be friends and support the open source ecosystem." And I was like, "Holy cow! Like this is the coolest."
And support, and support us, like support TanStack, and that is a huge validation for TanStack Start, which, as I say, is taking on Next.js. It has recently had its own set of troubles with the RSCs and CVE and all that.
Yeah. And just overall, I think TanStack Start is it's a pretty, comparatively to Next.js, it feels like a very unique approach.
Yeah, because you've got React Router, which is essentially the primary piece here. And then you got adapters effectively to the different React, Solid, and then layering on top of that, you've got Start. And so you've got a Start for React that'll give you things like server functions and API routes on top of it. Yeah, and middleware, all that good stuff.
And it's funny. Lately I've had to explain to people they're like, what is TanStack Start like? And it actually shares more DNA with something like React Router than it does with Next.js.
Sure.
But it's very client first. And there's lots of podcasts and lots of articles out there you can go and learn about kind of these differences of TanStack Start. But yeah, maybe I'm trying to think of how we could approach this from a unique angle and maybe give some new insight into Start.
I personally think about it a lot like the Pages Router. Pages Router was very popular. It just kind of added on you had a SPA and you needed things like, server, you needed SSR, you needed some API routes, and it just added those on in a nice incremental way.
It clicked for me too. When I used the Pages Router, I was like, let's not say that Pages Router is up to the modern snuff of these
No.
Start or anything. As far as like DNA goes, yeah, the Pages router would be like so similar to where like a really watered down version of what TanStack Start is today. Like the model, it was easy to reason about. Some of the APIs in hindsight now feel a little kludgy, like get server side props. Like it's not super flexible today, but at the time it was like, wow, this is so clear.
Yeah.
Like I'm going and getting props. I mean, we can call them props. I'm going and getting data on the server and it's going to get serialized to my component and show up right here in this props slot. That was super easy to think about and reason about. You had this serialization boundary that you're like, oh yeah, I can put something in here and it's going to get sent to the client here. I liked it. I did.
I liked it too. And I think a lot of folks did. And as I talked to a lot, like I know that I was working at Nike. They're still on the Pages router. My co-hosts over on Front and Fire, they work at a company where they tried and failed to do an app router port. There's a bunch of folks who are still in that phase and at that, working with that because it is easy to reason about. And I think TanStack Start actually is a really nice migration path from that gives you a lot of cool stuff and is much better for TypeScript. The loader stuff where you go and you get some data and then you bring it automatically creates a hook that's typed that you can bring it in with. And it's just so seamless. And then the ability to go and say, okay, I either want no SSR on this route, or I want full SSR, or we have a data only mode where it basically goes and fetches just the data, but it leaves all the rendering to the client. That is so cool. And how many times have you had a thing where it's okay, I'm going to have a use effect here that's going to set a piece of state that says whether I'm mounted on the client or not. And that, I'll just return null.
Get rid of a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, that's all gone.
But still utilize the server to push that data down. Everybody's always saying, you're like, oh, you're already there.
Yeah.
You're already there. Just grab the data. And then they say, and then SSR. And you're like, you don't have to render the HTML. You can just send the data down with your HTML and then like with your shell, basically.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then render on the client. It's genius. When Manuel was like, oh, we should do data only. I was like, what are you talking about? He's like, data. He's like, dude, data only. Like it's like a hybrid thing. And I was like, this is genius.
It's genius. It's genius. And we rarely ever talk about this. I think I talked about it at Cascadia, and I could tell that the audience just wasn't into it. And I'm like, if you guys like, man, I should just do a whole video on this. Because I mean, we think about it, like, how many times do you have a router, in-memory router definition, and you have something where it's going to be like, okay, before you render this route, go and get this data so that it's ready by the time that you get there. So you get a really nice page transition. It's okay. I'm not going to get the page transition to something blank and then populate it. It's just going to be there. This is just implicitly that. You just basically give it a loader inside the route and you say, okay, here's going to be the data for this route. Don't even go there until this is ready. And it just works, whether it works on the server, on the first hit, or whether you're doing a soft nav to it from route to route, it just works. It's like, oh, that's cool.
That's a bit of an unsung hero for TanStack Router itself. Obviously Start too, but Router, I don't think people realize all the time that like Router does not have query built into it. Like they're totally separate, but you still get the same experience because I built in a miniature version of query into Router. So the router itself has stale while revalidate patterns baked right into it. And I think the one thing I've been hearing a lot, just over the last week or two, as more people are starting to migrate to TanStack Start, and everybody's kind of, oh yeah, I love the server functions, or I love this, or I love that. But resoundingly together, everybody's like, it's fast, right?
It is fast.
And I'm wondering, like, what are they experiencing? That's like a user perspective of like, I'm clicking around and it feels fast. I'm like, what are they experiencing that's making them say it feels fast? And I think a lot of it comes down to this SWR caching that we do, because you can use React Query with React Router or Next.js, and you can get an app with React Query on top of those feeling really fast with prefetching and all that. But with this, you don't even need to add React Query. And I think a lot of applications don't have React Query in it because it is a complex thing to set up with Next and React Router. And so they come over to TanStack Router and they get their loaders and they pass their data, and then they're navigating around, and then all of a sudden they realize that, holy crap, when I click these buttons, especially ones I've already been to, it's instant. It's just there because we're doing the same thing that React Query is doing under the hood. We're caching the data. It has a life cycle. It's getting garbage collected when it's not used. We're preloading. There is a miniature version of React Query inside of TanStack Router. It's really cool.
That's awesome. I do have to mention though, every time I talk about loaders, like there is a footgun in there where, if you realize that loader is going to be called on the client if you do a soft nav, right? So if you're going to go and do things like database calls or fetching something, running whatever you want to do, then you got to have that stuff in a server function so that on the server, it just gets run just like a regular function. But then on the client, what happens is the client actually makes a server function call, gets the data, and then that unlocks the loader. And that it's really clean, it's really symmetric, but it is so easy to just like, oh, I'm going to do what I used to do in get server side props and just drop a DB in there and just go and get some data. Nope, that's not going to work. It's going to work on the server. It's going to work on the first hit. But then if you do a soft nav back to it, it's going to be like boom, or soft nav to anywhere else. It's going to be boom.
There's a theme there for a lot of the TanStack libraries, like Query. Once it clicks, what Query is doing with its caching and with its keys and caching, and once that lifecycle clicks, you're unlocked, and you're like, oh man, I don't need to learn anything else. I just know how to use this, and this is the greatest thing ever. And this is the similar unlock for TanStack Router, is that it's isomorphic. And I hate that we have to use that term and that we have to educate against that, because there's been so many different flavors over the years of what SPAs are, what they mean, and what isomorphic means, and API designs. React Router v7 framework mode, I mean, it's isomorphic as well. They just designed their APIs to be environment specific. Loader for server, client loader for the client. And ours are just together, right? And so, yeah, it's like once you realize that a loader is just going to get called all the time. Like if there's anything that someone can take away from this little moment of conversations, like your loaders, actually, it's not just your loaders, but especially loaders included, like everything that you write with TanStack Router and Start is going to get called both during SSR
right. Either
and
on the
client,
server or on the client, right?
Unless there's an explicit boundary of create server function. Okay, that's only going to run on the server. Or there's a client only component. Okay, that's only going to render on the client. But other than that, everything's always going to render in each environment. And I think once that clicks, the productivity can begin.
And I do want to say that there's this really nice like ramp of complexity from React Router in like a code mode where you basically define all your routes in code into a file router where you're still SPA, but you're actually defining your routes in a really nice way in your SPA routes in a nice way on the file system. And you actually, and you talked about this on another show where like you can actually define that file system. If you want to go that far, you can actually like make that happen. And then into Start where it's like, okay, building on top of that, you also get, API routes and server functions and all that. And so then that's a really nice thing for folks to realize is like, you don't need to like lift and shift to get that kind of increase of functionality. You don't have to like, oh, I know I have to have API routes. Okay, that means I need to move off of Vite SPA and then blah, 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 blah. It's like, no, kind of harkens back to that pages router thing where it's just like, you just add next to the dependency and you get, blah, blah, blah. Yeah.
And I've got to hand it a little bit to the React Router team. They nailed a lot of this before we did. And not to say that they nailed it perfectly, but they had a lot of these concepts before we did the hybrid file-based routing with the periods for like flat file-based routing, virtual routes. We call them virtual routes. I don't know what they call it, but they had something similar. They worked really hard on that and they announced it. And they're like, hey, you can configure your file-based routes using code. And we were like, hey, that's really cool. And I was like, hey, check this out. And then I went to sleep and woke up the next morning and Manuel was like, hey, so can we? And he pushed it and launched it. Like,
that's hilarious.
I was like,
oh
cool.
My God.
So a lot of this stuff some of this stuff is definitely learned from other frameworks, even Next.js. We definitely have been inspired by a lot of these other frameworks and what they're doing. But
And there's nothing wrong with that,
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
I think that we're doing it in a much better type safe way. I think that we have a knack for building APIs that are really pleasant to use. So it's not necessarily that we're doing something extremely novel, honestly. In fact, I said this in my talk in New York a couple weeks ago, but we've been built like before Next.js and before React Router, Remix or whatever. This is how you built full stack React applications. This is how it always worked. You would have this initial phase of SSR and you would mount into an SPA and then you would just run everything from the client. And you had to write isomorphic code. It was a great era. It was very young. People were building their own SSR engines with
That's
Express.
why. That's why Next.js was a big
That's exactly
hit.
why it came to exist.
There was so many homebrew. I was at 2 different companies and they each did like multiple different homebrews of SSR. And you're like, oh God.
Yeah, and it's like, oh yeah, we have Express. And then it calls render to string. And we're doing a bunch of things. And then it gets to the client and then we're hydrating and there weren't even hydration mismatch errors back then. It was just, you just broke stuff. But I lived through that era and I thought, man, this is great. It's almost if we rewound to that moment in time and just said, let's take what we're doing here and let's keep going with that and just polish it and make it better and evolve around that instead of, hey, you know what would be great is if we took all this stuff that we learned from the last decade and just threw it away and started over on the server.
But also, I think you've learned a lot of stuff that is very interesting from the most recent stuff. For example, server functions, right?
I was happy to be an observer, right? Because
yeah.
There were kludgy things about server-side stuff, right?
They pay the price. They showed an example and it's like, well, it's close. Not quite right. Like the Next.js app writer server functions, it's post only. And the TanStack Start version, you can actually get to define the method. It's going to be a get. Blah, blah, blah. And that actually, it sounds like it's not nothing, but it's huge. It's huge.
Oh, it's awesome.
Like content sites.
I love that it defaults to get too. I don't know if anybody realizes that, but when you use a server function,
I didn't realize that.
It actually defaults to get, and it can kind of catch people off guard. But the way that I look at it is that most people's first experience with a server function is fetching data, querying data. And to me, I would want that fetch to be cacheable. If you're in the browser, I'm telling you the browser level, you can't.
Or CDN, whichever.
Yeah, you can't cache a post request, but you can cache a get request at either of those levels as long as everything matches up. And some CDNs need some special stuff if you want to cache based on like search parameters or something like that. But it's all possible. And what's cool is when you call a server function by default, it's a get, and if you pass data to a get server function call, it doesn't get serialized as payload like in the body.
Right.
It turns into URL search parameters.
Right.
But if you turn it into a post, then we put it into the body. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, no, it's really cool. And there's good isolation. It's pretty clear what's going to be the server code, what's going to be, so you don't have the use server stuff you did with the Next.js stuff.
That's what I like. I just like rules. Honestly, the rules can be funny or weird or quirky, like isomorphic. I hate this word, but that's what we're using to describe it.
Why? It's this beautiful word. It makes us feel like we're doctors or something.
It kind of makes you sound smart.
Right. Yes.
But at least it's really consistent and easy. Like those rules don't follow you around like everywhere you go. You don't have to constantly be thinking about that rule. That's something I like to think about often with the way that we are writing libraries at TanStack is how often are you thinking about the rules of the library? If anything, React has taught us that these rules, they can take a toll on your cognitive overhead.
Cognitive load, yeah. Exactly.
And with something like server components and Next.js, I noticed that as I was evaluating them and trying them out in like the early Next.js versions, I was constantly going back and even from like yesterday when I was writing it, and then today I go back and I'm like, oh wait, hold on. Where am I? I'm in a server function.
Right. Which part of the donut am I in? Am I in the server part of the donut, or am I in the client hole of the donut?
Right. Am I in the island or the lake or the
right?
island?
Yes. Yes.
And I feel like with TanStack Start, you still have those rules where you're like, okay, I'm isomorphic, so I'm everywhere, baby. But then you have just from there, you only have two branches. It's like, am I in a server function or an API route? Am I on the server or am I on the client? And I only want to be on the client, right? There's only three circles that you have to think about, but it's not nested. It's not this recursive experience of you're constantly shifting around. I think that's helpful for people, honestly.
Definitely. I mean, I'm not a super smart guy, but like, I remember I went to a bar with Carniato and Mishko Hevery from the Angular team. It was just the three of us. Yeah. And we were just drinking beers and then I think we were talking about like the signals spec, and then they got into the donut hole problem, and at a certain point I'm like, it's either the beer or the conversation, but I just cannot follow like what you guys are on about, like,
or you just don't want to.
Yes, exactly. I just want to make an app, man.
Yeah,
like I don't care about the nested donuts and the thing and the async signals. I don't care. I don't like. I just help me make an app.
That's easy to lose sight of. I think I think that happens a lot within the dev tools community. And me, I wake up every morning and I'm not afraid of a lot of things, like very few things I'm afraid of. But there's one thing that I am afraid is that I will lose touch and become this it's that Simpsons gif. Just like, am I out of touch? No, the kids are out of touch. It's like the kids. And I'm just afraid that I will get out of touch with reality, and which is why constantly I'm always looking for, even though I want to wake up and do TanStack 100% of the time, I'm always looking for family members or friends or something like, hey, let me build you. I want to build this app. I mean, software engineers, that's our life, right? If it's not our parents coming to us to fix the printer, it's friends and family coming to us to be like, I got this idea for an app.
I know. Yeah, exactly.
Like, oh, but at the same time, I like to take those opportunities, even if I don't tell them I'm going to build it, and just, what is it like to just go and build something in? I spent 10 years in product, like in a SaaS product, a very deep, crazy SaaS product called Nozzle. And that 10 years was enough for me to know I don't really want to do product for the rest of my life, but man, was it the most valuable experience I've ever had in my life. Absolutely, hands down.
Yeah, if you don't have that, it's so easy to get into architecture astronaut space of this and this. And you're like, dude, I'm just making an e-commerce site. Like, I just need to know what the product is. I just need a fast page load, whatever, that kind of thing.
And I feel like I'm extremely pragmatic, almost to a fault. Somebody comes to me and they're like, hey, Tanner, got this idea. I want to build this shop. And I'm like, use Shopify, please. Just go use Shopify.
Right.
Like, no, but it's got this custom thing, this creator thing where like, clothing. I'm like, I don't care. Leave me alone. Go use Shopify. Oh, hey, I have a blog. Like, maybe we could use TanStack Start to write a blog. I'm like, sorry, are you a React developer? Are you an engineer? Okay, sure, you can do that. But if you're not, you should probably just go use WordPress. It's funny because it's also about timeline of like where people are in their journey, right? Who was I talking? I was just talking to the T3 chat team. Right. And we were all kind of agreeing on this. I'm like, they're at the point where they're using TanStack Start now. We were talking and they're like, oh yeah, Theo may not want to use TanStack Start because he doesn't think they need like marketing. Like they don't need the SSR part of it. And I'm like, don't you guys have a pricing page and a marketing page? And like, no, not yet, but we're going to have that. And I was like, okay, there you go. Now you can use that. And I'm like, oh, good. And I said, but that doesn't mean you're going to use it forever, because let me tell you a story. A long time ago, I built the marketing site for Nozzle in React. And that took me down this wild goose chase of, ultimately, I built React Static, which was my first framework. It doesn't exist anymore. I mean, it does. It's old and nobody uses it anymore. But React Static was like my answer to be like, oh yeah, I'm going to do a CMS and all this stuff and with static builds. This was when I was competing with Gatsby and early Next.js. Something interesting happened though. That worked for like a year. And then we got a marketing team. They were like, okay, we want to build this new page. And I was like, okay. And it killed me on the inside because I did WordPress for years. I mean, we all did, right? And traditionally I would be like, go make a new page template and leave me alone.
Yeah.
Go make a new page template and edit the HTML however you want and leave me alone. I don't want to be a part of it. But they had to come to me now and be like, we need a new page template. We need you to register it. We need a UI. Now I'm getting into headless CMSs,
Yeah.
And it's funny because so it's like eventually, depending on where in the timeline you are, your tools and your teams are going to change. And like ultimately your team isn't going to want to go through you for all this. They're going to want to load Google Tag Manager and do a bunch of A/B test marketing.
Mm-hmm.
And like, trust me, you just don't want to be part of that.
They're going to want to use jQuery and whatever, or HTMX, whatever it is.
And the same thing happens with backend full stack stuff too. I kind of chuckle every time that the full stack community, we talk about, oh yeah, I'm going to build it full stack in TypeScript and we're just going to scale it to like a gajillion. And I'm like, you know what? It's probably the right decision to write what you're doing at full stack because you need something to work right now. And you'll be able to get really far running serverless and TypeScript. And maybe you'll move on to Effect if you're like, no, we have to stay TypeScript. But it's just funny because I would call it a privilege where if your software, if your product gets big enough and popular enough to the point where you need to switch languages on your backend and have a dedicated backend thing.
That's like, a BMW level problem.
Yeah, we need Go. We need a whole team. Then you start getting into how do we do API contracts? You're not writing Zod, like you're using Open API or Protobuf and all your problems change. But we like in the front end full stack community, we like to pretend that day will never come, that it never needs to come, which is just funny to me a little bit. But that's the kind of perspective I always want to have. It's like, these are tools to help me build what I need to do right now. Get this client happy. Let's live to refactor another day. Let's live to die another day. And if that day in the future means maybe we don't use API routes, maybe we use a different language or something like that. But that's what TanStack Start is. It's a graceful journey across that. In the very beginning, it can give you everything you need. And as you move along your journey, you can whittle it down to only the parts that are going to stick with you. I'm pretty sure that you're always going to need some kind of dedicated system to do SSR because SSR is a beast. Express,
Yeah.
So that will always be a thing with Start. But all these other pieces, they're very Lego. Maybe you put the whole kit together in the very beginning and you're like, oh, look, woo, it's so pretty. And then as time moves on, you start to remove Lego pieces and hook them up to other machines.
Yeah. Or okay, now we're going to change out the back end. So it's Go on the back end or whatever. And there you go. It was interesting, that conversation with Parniato and Chico Hevery. We talked about at one point how there's no perfect framework. Basically takes every single type of application that you'd want to build, all the way from like a content site that has almost no dynamic behavior, all the way up to
completely static
Figma thing where it's basically entirely dynamic, right? Different frameworks fit in different spots in there.
Yeah.
And I think that was one of the things.
Sometimes you don't even have a framework. Like Figma, like they've written their own WASM engine for their canvas.
Yeah, all the side panels I think are still React, but like all the stuff that actually happens where you zoom in and zoom out, which by the way, just from a CS perspective, it's pretty badass. It's pretty impressive that they can go.
Very impressive. Yeah. But what a fun problem to solve, right? Figma is probably going, we're making all this cash. We've got all these users, but we got a performance problem. And they had the privilege, the opportunity to be like, we can build something custom.
Yeah.
In WASM. Like, how cool is that? If you're just starting out and you don't have any money or funding or you don't have any customers, what a bad call.
Yeah. Well, actually, no. If I recall correctly, I used to work at Adobe and a bunch of folks went from like the Photoshop team over to Figma. And I think they actually started with the rendering engine and then they looked for a product to really make that rendering engine shine.
Wild. I did not know that. The stories that I had heard and what, just kind of.
Maybe I'm wrong. Could be. But that's what I heard was like
mine is all third hand. So I wouldn't trust what I'm saying.
It's impressive. However they got there, it's still super impressive. But yeah, like that whole like spectrum of super static to super dynamic, like Astro fits really well in the more the staticky end of the world, whereas I would say Start gets more into, it makes more sense from the dynamic side. And I think that's why it was really cool to see Netlify and Cloudflare come together and fund both of those things. So it's like they understand that both of those things are in effect serving different-ish areas. Although you showed a POC where you basically had some routes. It was Astro hosting Start, and you could go and have an Astro homepage and an Astro marketing page, which is great because that's exactly what you said. You could just give that over to the marketing folks and be like, I don't care what goes on in here. You could do whatever you want. Just don't mess with this login button, right?
Yeah, don't mess with that button or the /app route.
Right. Yeah, the /app route is all us. And but you could still have it all in the same monorepo, and they could go and manage that. Yeah, it's really cool. Yeah.
And we're seeing some of the same, the stepping stones for coming out of Start as well. There's people running Start and they'll say, I need something a little more beefy for my API routes. So they'll end up using Hono. They'll stick Hono on a Start catch-all route and they'll run Hono. Or they'll use TRPC and they'll just keep using TRPC on top of TanStack Start. Or you'll see it the other way around where, like with T3 Chat, they ended up using Nitro for some of its server-side API route stuff. They wanted like unstorage and cached functions and kind of these Nitro-y features that are really neat, but they didn't want to give Startup, obviously. So they have Nitro in front, and then on the catch-all route, they run Start.
Interesting. Wow. Yeah. Okay.
So it's very composable because I think people don't understand either that Start itself is not a server. Start is actually a request handler. When you deploy it, Nitro or Cloudflare or Netlify or whoever is wrapping that request handler up in a little runtime server.
Yeah. And that's actually a really interesting point because we talked about this yesterday where somebody asked, will you ever have TanStack Start be a service like Vercel with Next.js?
Yeah.
And will you ever keep people from deploying it like on your own? And no, that's 100% antithetical to what we want to do.
It's not.
You want to be able to,
what we want to do.
Yeah. You want to be able to deploy it on a VPS. If you want to go get some like $5.99 Minecraft hosting server and drop it on there, sure, go for it. It works.
Yeah. Yeah, we want it to be really portable. And again, I just think that building software for everybody is really hard, actually, because there's so many opportunities to optimize something for something specific that's popular. Even internally, we've had opportunities to be like, if we were deploying to Vercel or if we were deploying just to Cloudflare or just to Netlify, think of the optimizations you could do in XYZ. So yeah, it's definitely a
balancing act, if I can throw that in there. Yeah,
it is a balancing act, but we have pledged at TanStack not to bias any of the core software to services or providers. We're happy to partner with them and work on integrations, work on the ecosystem around those experiences. But the core software, it's just an uncompromisable, non-negotiable that it just has to stay unbiased and open.
All right. I should put my LogRocket podcast host hat back on and just kind of wrap up. Let's talk about what next steps are for TanStack, where you see it going over the next year or two. How can people help TanStack? How can companies help TanStack? All that good stuff.
Yeah, where it's going, we're launching some new libraries. We're not looking for reasons to build new libraries, but there are new libraries. We just announced TanStack AI Alpha. And for anybody listening, Jack is one of the leads on TanStack AI along with Alim and me and Harry. And TanStack AI has been a whirlwind. You guys basically, after our initial planning sessions, you guys basically whipped it out in 6 weeks. But there's so much runway there. We're going to be busy with AI into all of next year.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And many cool things we can do with it, because now if we control like DB, which
we can mention it really quick.
Yeah. Okay, go for it.
Let's say TanStack DB is another one it's in beta. And DB is a little difficult to explain. People are like, why do you call it DB? It really
Right,
is.
because it's got that ORM vibe to it, but it's not an ORM.
Yeah, it really is a database. If you look at the architecture inside of TanStack DB, it's a database. But the difference is that it lives in JavaScript on the client or anywhere that you want to deploy it. And the difference is that instead of persisting data to tables or some like concrete persistent layer, you can sync that data in from anywhere. So it's almost like as if a database and React Query had a baby. And
I like to think of it as if you imagine like a Firebase or something like that, and you just cleave off the actual like persistence layer of it.
Yeah,
and you have the client, and the client has all the ability to like sync stuff and do the live query and live connections and all. That's basically what DB is. And then you can put anything you want underneath.
It's built for speed. It uses differential data flow internally to incrementally calculate views into the data that you've queried. It uses an incremental view management system. It's very technically impressive. Kyle Matthews and Sam Willis are the ones over at Electric who have been heading that up.
Yeah, it is very impressive.
And like you said, combined with AI, I think there's a story there for challenges in AI, building AI stuff that DB could really help out with. Obviously, Start is in RC. Not much is going to change for 1.0. We're just polishing up some things. And the plan was to get it out before the end of the year. I don't know if that's going to happen, but
fingers crossed.
Yeah, for the most part, what you see there today is going to be what's in 1.0. And obviously, or naturally, we can't hold people back anymore. They're just migrating. Like I was surprised to see T3 chat migrate over and it's still in release candidate. But
I think that's okay. Yeah. I think folks have to look at TanStack releases differently than say like a vendor or a company that has like a big marketing push and they have a specific date where they want to drop stuff. And it's no, TanStack is going to iterate on stuff until it's good and it's right. And then they're going to release it. Right. And that's a different standard.
We've been working on it for 2 years. And we've been shipping TanStack Start with it since 2 months after I started building
TanStack.com,
yeah. Or TanStack.com has been shipped with it. We've obviously had to go through those breaking changes with TanStack.com, but that's the fun part, dog fooding your own stuff.
Oh, yeah. Been there.
Yeah. So Start, DB, LM is also building TanStack DevTools, which is really fun. It's taking all of our DevTools experiences and making them like an official thing.
And you can also go and add on your own DevTools, which is really cool.
Yeah,
like you can actually really customize it.
That's very fun too. Like to host your DevTools inside of the TanStack DevTools harness it's pretty fun. There's also Pacer. Kevin's built out Pacer, which is more of a utility library, but man, is it useful. I use it everywhere. And we might even have one more in store for next year, but we'll see. I don't know. It probably won't be much of a secret when we bring it out because it's kind of just one that we haven't been working on for a while. So we're just going to re-release it, I guess.
A little bit of breaking news right here on the LogRocket podcast. Awesome.
Yeah. So the future for TanStack, we're just going to, from a business standpoint, obviously, I'm looking for the sustainability story. Up to this point, I didn't even think that we would get this far, honestly, that I would be able to even go full time. But it's been a little over 18 months now that I've been full-time on TanStack Start, or TanStack in general, and it's working out. I'm doing great. And I've already gotten past the threshold where I'm starting to kick a lot of money out to core contributors and people in the community. And that just keeps growing. The more partners that TanStack gets, the closer we get to basically sustaining every contributor that works on TanStack core packages. Maybe not full-time. Obviously, that's the dream, is like anybody who would want to work full-time on TanStack and earn some awesome, really good money doing it. That's the dream. But the reality is that a lot of contributors for TanStack have full-time jobs. They don't want to necessarily work full-time for TanStack, but being able to compensate everybody for the amount of love and care and time that they put into TanStack as a whole that's something I want to do. Whether they call it a part-time, full-time job or not, I just want to make sure that people are rewarded for the insane amount of work and care that they put into it.
If you're a company that depends on TanStack or you're working on a solopreneur thing and you can throw a few bucks or a sponsorship TanStack's way, I think that's worth doing because you guys are doing amazing stuff.
If you're a solo dev or even a small company, if you do GitHub sponsors, if you go to my personal GitHub sponsors, all of the sponsorship money that goes through GitHub sponsors is actually forwarded out directly to maintainers. If you're a big company, you want to do something really fun, partnerships are the way to go. That's where we can build things together, build integrations together. You get your logo plastered all over TanStack and get to piggyback on the TanStack brand a little bit.
And we have an app creator that will you can put your company in as an add-on. We've done a lot of cool integrations with Neon. Yeah, so there's a lot of cool stuff there.
And there's more that we have planned in that arena as well that hopefully we can talk about again, maybe in a little while.
All right. Thank you, Tanner, for showing up. It's been awesome. So this has been the PodRocket podcast. It's a development podcast brought to you by LogRocket. And just once again, LogRocket provides that AI first session replay with analytics, surface those UX and technical issues impacting those customer experiences. And you can start your journey with it today by going over to logrocket.com, signing up for a free trial. It's great stuff. I'm Jack Herrington, and check you later.